G'day everyone, welcome to New Tech. My name's Miles and it's wonderful to have you here. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you my process on setting up batch processing on any type of laser using Lightburn. So let's get started. Now in this video today, I'm going to be using the NEJE 3 Max laser machine, and the reason is because it is fantastic for doing this batch processing, mainly because of the size of this machine. I can fit so many different items onto this bed all at once, and then go ahead, just press play, and then it would complete it all. Now the crazy thing about this machine, it can be doubled in size with an upgrade kit, so you can make it even larger. And I didn't look at any instructions on how to put it together, so it did take me about 3 hours or so to put it together, but in the end, it is a really well built machine. I'm really happy with the construction, especially that it uses these cable chains and some really great tensioners for the belt as well. So the other thing too, I'm going to be using this E40 laser module. Now this E40 laser module is mainly for engraving only, but it is really a narrow depth of field for the focal point, but it is great because it is 10 watts, so it can put out a lot of power and can go very quickly, especially for your laser engraving. It does do cutting as well, and it comes with air assist, but it's mainly for engraving only. Now this can be done with any shape materials. You can use square, you can use anything that you have for any cutting. Now I'm going to be using this 100mm these coasters here, and the thing is that these coasters aren't perfectly round, so they're very roughly sawn, and they're not perfect, so it works really well for showing you my process on setting up these through Lightburn. Let's jump straight over to Lightburn. I'm going to show you my process from there. So here is an example of what we're going to try and aim for today. There's a couple of things here that makes this project a really great template to use over and over again for projects. The first thing is you can see that I have a background here, and that background is this black line with a crosshair through it. Now that's there obviously just so I can place my coasters in the correct place. So that's going to be my very first thing that I'll engrave, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So I'll go through and I'll engrave this firstly onto like a scrap piece of timber. Today I'm going to be using a piece of MDF that was just a baseboard for something else. I don't need it for anything, and you can certainly use it over and over again for your projects. So here you can see that I've laid out that kind of crosshair and circle design, and on top of it you can see I've put my engraved parts as well. So that's the fill there. You can see it's over the top of that border, plus over any text or graphics that I put in there as well. Now we're going to jump straight into that tutorial today and find out how to put this stuff together, and the best way to kind of cut to save a lot of time. There's a couple of settings I'm going to look at which is going to save a lot of time for the future. So let's just go a new project there. Won't save this one. So the very first thing is that we need to figure out the size of what we're going to be engraving onto. So I'm just using coasters, and they're 100mm. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that circle to start off with. You can see that one's red to start off with, so that's in the fill, but I usually use all my cutting or any line work in the first 00 layer there, or the black layer. And you can see as I drew that circle, I held down shift just to make sure that that circle was uniform. It didn't kind of warp or distort. At the top there, you can see that I've put all my shapes on a lock at the moment. That means if I change something here, then it will have a kind of a similar change into the height or width, whichever one I change. So now my coaster is they're about 100mm. They're a bit inconsistent because they're just roughly cut into a circle. So sometimes that they differ for about 5mm each, and sometimes they're not exactly circles. So this is really important to make sure that we have something to align it to on the baseboard before I start engraving. So I'm going to put all my circles at the moment to about 110. Actually, we'll see. Yeah, we'll put out 110. It just gives me, or maybe 105. We'll give that a go. 105 just gives me a bit of extra playing room, that when I align the coaster, I know that it can have a bit of a play area, and that I won't kind of put the coaster on and then lose that circle altogether and not be able to see it. So it's just important to make sure that that circle is just a little bit bigger than what we are engraving onto. The second part here is I'm just going to put in that crosshair here. So I'm just going to click once and then hit escape. And I'll do one more line. Now you can see that this is not perfect, but don't worry too much at the moment. We're just drawing some lines at the moment to get them down, and then I'll play around with that other stuff in a second. So I'm going to make these lines about 120 millimeters long each. Now the reason why I've made them a bit longer is just so that as I said earlier, if we make these just a little bit bigger than what the coasters are, that means we don't have a problem with aligning later on and the coasters don't cover over these parts. So go ahead and select the shapes. Now what I want to do is get that crosshair exactly in the center of that circle. There's a really quick way on how to do that without using your mouse trying to move these objects around, and that's using these tools at the top. So my go-to tool is to use this one here, which is aligning both the vertical and horizontal centers. So if I go ahead and click that, you can see that that snaps it exactly into the right locations that we need to. I'm going to go ahead and group these objects together just so that when I drag it around later on, that it doesn't accidentally separate anything and put anything out of whack. So I can either use the button up here, which is the group selection button, or I can hit Control G on the keyboard, which will group these objects together. So now if I click any part of this object, it will now be a grouped object. Okay, moving on to the second part, we're going to just copy and paste, Control C, Control V for copy paste. We're going to start aligning this. So I'm going to have about 4 coasters down here, and then I'll go 3 coasters next to it. Just allows that kind of tessellation, or fitting between each of these gaps of each row or column of the coasters. So I'm just going to create 4 of these. So copy and paste those 2 to make another 2. Now it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned. I can make them align evenly aligned using this one here. So making it's either that one or there we go, height centered. I believe that makes them all the same distance apart, but it doesn't really matter too much because we're just using it as an idea of where to place the coasters for our reference point. So now I've got those 4 coasters or 4 outlines down. The next one I'm going to put 3 next to it. So I'm just going to select these 3, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to copy and paste those, and I'm going to put these ones in those gaps there. Now I think I'm going to do about 28 coasters in total across. So I'm just going to copy and paste them as I go, and I duplicate them and more appear, and then copy these ones, and I'll have to delete a couple off the edge there as that'll be too much for the baseboard. I mean, I could squish these together a bit more to fit these ones on, but I'm not going to worry about these 3 today. Okay. All right, that looks really good. So I've got the base down now, and this is going to be my very first pass just so I can align all my coasters. I'm going to go ahead now and import the engraving part that I'm going to put over the top of my coasters. So what I'd suggest, even if you wanted to do any cutting or anything on top of this layer, create a cutting layer that's separate from this one, because it's going to make it much easier later on to separate your background cut or engrave with the foreground objects. So as I go through today, you will see as I'm going to import a couple of these designs that I've done. So A, B, C, D. And now I'm going to import these ones in. They've come on top of each other, which is quite frustrating, but I'm just going to pull them out here. Nope, that's not going to work. I might import them separately. Okay, undo all that. I might try it again. I want to try and import them over here somewhere. There they go. Okay, so I'm going to place those ones over here. Okay, that looks good. Okay, that one looks good. That one's just lines. I think that this one looks fine. I think this one belongs inside this circle here. There we go. I'm just going to group that together. Now, here's a little trick that I'm going to be using quite a lot through this tutorial, is that every time, and this is, for example, what's just happened here, every time that I want to align something perfectly centered to another object, I'm just going to group. That looks like it's already grouped together, and that one looks like it's already grouped together. So what I can do is select that one, then go ahead and select these ones,
every time that you select something to center it, make sure that your last object is the object that you want to center everything to. So if I go center now, you can see that that jumps into the center of that object, and that was the last one that I had selected. So now I've got my 3 or 4 different borders there. We're going to go ahead and place them in this area where we're going to be engraving, but you can see at the moment it's still coming out on the same layer as my cutting line. Now, I usually use red as a fill, so I'm just going to jump in and use red, and it makes it nice and easy today. You can see the differences between these different objects. Okay. And I've also grouped each one of these objects together, so when I select one, that they kind of all come over together. So I'm just going to roughly drop these into where I need them to go. Whoops, I did do some parts there. This part wasn't grouped. Okay, drop it in there, and I'll do this one. Whoops. Let's group that one before we drag it. Okay, now let's have a look here. So this one here, now I'm going to try and aim that my borders aren't any greater than 90 mil, just so that there's a slight gap between the edge of the border and the edge of the coaster. So I'm going to go ahead and just change my coaster sizes, or the borders for the coasters, I should say. So go through and change them all to 90. This one too. And the very last one. Okay, you can see some of them had to go bigger, some of them smaller, but they're not all perfectly in the center. So let's go ahead and center these. So select the first part, then the second part, and then I hit the center tool. First part, second part, center. There we go, nice and easy. And very quickly, you can get a really nice looking coaster design just by aligning your centers with each other. So the very next part that I want to do is adding in text. Now this is really great. I'm just going to put some sample text in here. So I'm just going to type in insert. Now you can see here what I tend to do when I'm creating any type of typography or any graphic element. I like to put my text into different layers. Now the reason why is just so that I can do what I'm doing now is move the text around independently of each other. If I keep them all in the same text box, it's really hard to place them with each other. So I'm just going to type in text and then pop another one saying here. Whoops, let's click in there. Whoops, I'll put that in caps there as well. Okay, insert text here. I'm just going to leave it like that for the moment just because it is a template, one that I can come back to later on, and I'll just position this text to kind of how I want that relationship there. Now I'm going to be using those alignment tools again, so I'm just going to select these 3 and I'm going to make sure that they're all in line with their center. Now what I'm going to do, I want that text right in the center of this circle, and if I just select this circle and then go to center, you can see that the text will kind of collapse over the top of each other. So I'll just undo that. What I want to do, actually I'll just push this up just a tiny bit. What I want to do is I want to get this text in the center, but I don't want it to collapse. So what I can do before I center it, I can select my text and hit Control G, or go up and hit the group button. Now if I select this outer circle, when I center it, that it will no longer collapse that text because I've kind of set that as a grouped text or object. So that's looking really nice. Now the best part about it is that I can go through later on and I can edit this text. It's not something that's kind of set in stone, so I can just ungroup it and I can change things such as like the fonts or the text or what it says. So I can come in here and place something else in there. So what I'm going to do for the moment, just for today's tutorial, I'm going to leave it as just an insert text here, but for the actual cutting today, you can see that I've put together my previous file that I showed you at the beginning of this video. I'm going to pop that in here. Now you can see that might just need to be changed slightly depending on the size. I click on that one and go center. And the other thing you can see too, I haven't completed any other ones of the coasters yet, just because what I want to try and do is just get these nice and schmick, these first 4 coasters, because then it's really simple just to copy and paste across and make this a bit smaller here. There we go. And put that in the center. Come remember if I put this one in the center or not. Let's do it now. No, it didn't. Fantastic. Okay, so now I have my 4 coasters done. What I can do now, I might just turn off the background, which is this one, show, unshow, and I'm going to select this one here. And all I need to do is copy and paste. But because I only have 3 in my next one, I'm just going to select those 3 and paste them in. Now, what I'm going to do is, whilst these are selected, I'm going to group them together. And the reason why I'm going to group them together, because it's going to make this next process of aligning it with these 3 really, really easily. So I'm going to select these 3 as well, and I want to group those ones together. So if I select these ones, and then I go ahead and select that second row there, and I go to align, you can see that they place them perfectly on top of those 3. And you can imagine from here on in, it's going to be a really simple task of just copying what I have already and then pasting it where it needs to go. There we go. Now I'm just going to group that for the moment because I need to select these ones that I've done and go to group. Now once again, select both of those. That's the second one, and center. And the very last part's super easy. Let's go ahead and I'm going to ungroup these ones for the moment because I only need these 3 lines, because I have to delete that last one, show those ones, and come over here. I'm going to just group those together before I paste the other ones. Group and paste, align. Whoops, I need to group it together first before I do that. Whoops, nope, too many groups. I group just those ones together. Okay, now select those ones. They should go together now beautifully. Okay, so you can see here that I have a really nicely set up template ready to go for any of my designs that I want to do in the future. I have the 2 different layers that I can start with, the background layer, and then I can go through and do the foreground. The only thing I need to do now is make sure that I set up my speed. Now this is really important, and this is the next part I'm going to go through, is what's going to really assist you with making sure that your engraving doesn't take like 10 days to complete. So there's a couple of different things that I like to do before I hit go on these files. And the first thing is, with traditional engraving, what usually happens is that the head of the laser would just go backwards and forwards over the entire artwork. So this goes over all this area, and what we can see is that there's these large gaps of white space. And it's kind of useless for our laser head to be going over this white space. And what I try and do is do each one of these coasters independently, or just do them in that coaster and then move on. And that just stops it from kind of having to travel so much between each coaster every time that it wants to engrave. So what I tend to do, the first thing is I'm going to go up to where I have my little spanner up here, so the device settings, and I'm going to check that I've put my fast white space scan on. Now, my machine can run, I believe, at about 1,000 millimeters per second, so that's it's really fast, and that's quite pointless if you're engraving that fast, but it's really good if you want to jump from one area to another really quickly. So just make sure that you've set your maximum speed of your laser engraver up in the fast white space scan, and then go down and hit OK. And the second thing that you need to do is double click on the speed power of your engraving button there, and make sure that down the bottom here you've said fill shapes individually. Now what this will do, it will make sure instead of filling all the shapes at once, so instead of the laser engraving going over the entire artwork, it will just use these groups. It will figure out, oh, this is a group here, this is grouped together. I'm just going to go ahead and just do this one coaster, then move to the next one. And this will save so much time in your overall cutting time for the project. And I believe you'll easily save up to about an hour or more with the engraving. So let's go ahead and go OK. The other thing I like to do quickly is just to check that everything is okay in this. Make sure I haven't done anything silly within the artworks themselves. So I like to go up here and click the preview button at the top. And you can see here it gives you a good idea on how this is going to work out. So if I go play, you can see here that we'll start with this coaster down there. I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. And once it's finished that coaster, it will then jump over to the next one. You can see it's only using one tiny little travel point from one coaster to another instead of using multiple travel points to get between each coaster, which is just crazy. So this one works really, really nicely for doing multiple coasters at once. There's also a different setting that you can set up. If you've got something such as more of just an outline, so if you're just doing the borders and not doing in the internal parts at all, there is also another setting. Have a play around with it because it might be really useful for your other projects. If you go to the advanced settings, just in the speed power button, if you double click on that, you'll find this one saying flood fill here. Now the flood fill works really well because it just does each shape individually. So it'll come in the T and it'll just do the T, then it'll go on to the E, then it'll go into the X. So depending on what you've got, it's not very useful in this situation because there's so much detail. But if you're doing something which things are really widespread apart, but you just want to do each thing separately, this is also a really great way to engrave as well. But I'm not going to be using that because it will take longer than just using the fill shapes individually. So going to go ahead and click OK. And then from now, all I need to do is jump over to the laser and see how we go. So I'll see you shortly.
So after doing the sensorless homing on this machine, I was able then to lie down my piece of plywood that I can go ahead and trace out the outlines for where I need to put my coasters. And the great thing about this laser machine that I can use this height adjuster really easily to get those fun resolution in the Z height of the machine. So it's really handy to have something like that when you're changing the Z height quite often. So that was a reasonably easy process to go through and trace the outlines of where I need to place the coasters. And then the next thing was aligning the coasters, and that was kind of tricky because these things were so awkward and they're not perfectly round, but they ended up fitting in really nicely. And because I had made those oversized circles, I could really align that nice and neat. And so I went ahead and placed them over onto the bed, and you can see that that took a little bit of time just to adjust. And the other thing too is I had a look at the grain on the timber as well, and I checked that the grain was all going horizontal because then that was uniform grain pattern that I wanted to include within the engraving itself. So then the next part is taking it back to the home position, because that's where I started my 0, point from, and I could always rely that that was going to be the exact 0, point from the homing position, which was fantastic to use. And then I went ahead, raised the Z height of the laser, and then off I went for my laser engraving. And what I didn't realize at the time, that there was a slight spelling mistake in the word coffee. So that's okay, because I let this run through. I could just sand it off and then redo it after this run through. This was a really successful way on doing multiple coasters and really speeding up the process and time for the laser engraving. I hope that you took a lot away from today's video and certainly helped you with doing those batch processing. Now, this machine was fantastic. That was the longest I've ever run this machine, and it didn't skip a beat, not even once. So I was really happy with the outcome of this machine. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like the video, and stick around because there's some really great content coming up soon. So I'll see you next time.